We're going to take a look back at the fantasy football season for 2024, do some reminiscing, and give out some fantasy football awards from the past year. There have been some very memorable moments, memorable performances, moments you want to forget, players you want to forget drafting. We're going to cover everything in this episode as we look back on the 2024 fantasy football season. We have 10 different awards we're giving out today. We have the Fantasy Playoffs MVP, the Rookie of the Year, the Waiver Add of the Year, the Biggest Bust, Steal, Surprise, the Breakout of the Year, the Comeback Player of the Year, the Best Performance of the Year, and the Fantasy MVP. Yes, that's a lot of awards in not enough time to talk about it, fellas. So let's start with the Fantasy MVP. We're each going to share who we think should win the award. And then you all had a chance to voice your opinion over on our Instagram and Facebook pages by voting in polls. And boy, did you all show out for these polls. It was fun to see all the votes pour in. So the Fantasy Playoffs MVP, the candidates we had here were Brian Thomas Jr., who was the wide receiver 1 overall from weeks 15 to 17. You had Jahmyr Gibbs, who had 3 straight games of 24 plus fantasy points. Jonathan Taylor with a few massive games, obviously. And then JK Dobbins was averaging nearly 31 fantasy points per game in the fantasy playoffs, was the overall quarterback 1. Cameron, who would you give this award to?
I got to give it to Brian Thomas. And this might just be personal because on 3 of my 4 championship teams, I had Brian Thomas. But I like Brian Thomas because not only was he 2 PPR points per game higher than the next closest wide receiver in T. Higgins, but he came into this season probably as your wide receiver 3 or 4. So right on one of my championship teams, I had T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, and then Brian Thomas. And so it was just that ability to have him in that wide receiver 3 spot to really put that team over the top kind of a thing. Every single game of this, 20 plus points in each game. I think I would give it to Brian Thomas, but it's really hard to say, nitpick between the 4 of these guys.
Right. It's truly nitpicking between the 4 of these guys. So Ty, it's your turn to nitpick. Who would you give the award to?
I would personally give it to Jahmyr Gibbs because I think the
Just
odds.
Brian Thomas hater.
Yeah, partially. Just showing my hand a little bit here. No, but I think because out of the 4 guys, I think JK Dobbins would be the next guy up in this situation. You likely were in the semifinals and the championship if you had Jahmyr Gibbs, right? And ultimately, Jahmyr Gibbs with, again, 25 plus points in his last 3 games in fantasy playoffs. That makes a difference, right? JK Dobbins also putting up 30 plus in his last 2 games. That makes a difference, right? But again, I think Jahmyr Gibbs made it count the most in the games that matter most for you in your fantasy playoffs.
I think you could give it to either Brian Thomas or Jahmyr Gibbs. These are the top 2 guys for me when I was looking over the award. I don't think there's a wrong answer between the 2, but we'll let the people break the tie here. The winner of the Fantasy MVP award this year is a really long drum roll. I wasn't expecting it to be that long. Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. Jahmyr Gibbs. Goodness, I'm pulling up the percentages here. I was surprised how much he actually pulled away by the end of it. 34% of the votes Jahmyr Gibbs was given. Brian Thomas won at 23%. Jonathan Taylor was also at 23%. JK Dobbins was at 20%. So this was actually a tighter race than initially anticipated. But Jahmyr Gibbs does run away with it. 34% of the vote. Jahmyr Gibbs, congratulations on being the Fantasy Football Fellas Fantasy Playoffs MVP this year. Let's move on to the Rookie of the Year now. The nominees here, once again, Brian Thomas Jr., Brock Bowers, who is essentially going to break the rookie receptions record. It's also between him and Malik Neighbors, who's also on this list. He has 4 receptions behind Brock Bowers. And then JK Dobbins, another nominee here. Cameron, who would you give the Rookie of the Year to? For fantasy football specifically, who would you give the Rookie of the Year to?
Got to give it to Brock Bowers. He's, within about a point of Brian Thomas. I guess Malik Neighbors is 3 points per game higher, but missed a couple of games. But he's doing it from the tight end position. He came in as the tight end 11, It's, it just doesn't get much better than that. Jane Daniels, phenomenal year as well, right? I mean, you could probably consider all 4 of these guys league winner status. Maybe you don't quite give it to Malik Neighbors because he was drafted in the 3rd round, but still phenomenal season. But yeah, I gotta, just because tight ends were so down this year, and Brock Bowers was just consistent, and finished the wide receiver 2 in points per game, wide receiver 1 overall. I'd give it to Brock Bowers.
Ty, what about you?
I give it to Brock Bowers as well. Not just the fact that he's a tight end, but he did it on the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, Desmond Ridder. Didn't matter who was playing the quarterback. The offense was Brock Bowers, right? So, yes, like Cam said too, the other 3 guys, phenomenal rookie seasons, right? There's something good about each one of these guys. Brock Bowers is just the one that shines the brightest, though, to me.
It's the value you got Brock Bowers at. It's the fact that he's just dominating the tight end position this year. It's hard to not give him the award. I really wanted to find a way to try and vouch for Brian Thomas Jr. here, but I just don't think you can when you see how valuable Brock Bowers was at his ADP, the team in which he's doing it on, and the future that he has ahead of him in the NFL. The people now, it only matters. Oh, what are you looking at me like that for?
I'm just
the team he's on and didn't mention Malik Neighbors.
Well, yeah, that's true. But it's also that we could have done a Lam McConkey. We could have done a Bo Nix. We could have done again, I'm just saying that's how
Bucky Irving was another name that I considered.
Yeah, Bucky Irving, right? Yeah. That's how good rookies were this year. And that just shows how good Brock Bowers was that we chose him over some of the other guys.
Right. I mean, Brock Bowers, tight end 1 overall this year, though. I mean, he has just been getting it done in every facet of the game. The people, though, their decision is really the only one that matters. So the people voted the fantasy rookie of the year to be Brock Bowers of the Las Vegas Raiders. The people are in agreement here. Brock Bowers got 45% of the vote. Jaden Daniels, surprisingly, in 2nd place with 38% of the vote, was a lot closer than anticipated. Brian Thomas Jr. only getting 10% of the vote, and Malik Neighbors bringing it home with only 7% of the vote. I will say that's not to take anything away from Malik Neighbors' season, but again, I think we hammered it home. It's about where you drafted Brock Bowers in your fantasy drafts this year. I think Malik Neighbors went through a little bit of a stretch where people started to question him too. Brock Bowers was just steady, consistent. You might have had a down game here or there, but you wouldn't bet on it 2 weeks in a row. So Brock Bowers is your fantasy rookie of the year, according to the Fellowship. Before we go any further in the awards, though, got to remind the people over on YouTube, we're not going anywhere this offseason. We're down to 2 episodes a week now, but we're bringing you dynasty rankings next week. We're bringing you all sorts of other dynasty content, trade targets this offseason. We're covering the NFL draft as well. So if you're a fan of football and or fantasy football, this is the place you want to be this offseason. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell as well, so you know when all of our newest content is out. We're even going to be live streaming some fantasy drafts throughout the offseason. You're like, you guys are crazy drafting fantasy teams in the offseason. Yeah, our friends over at Underdog Fantasy, they run fantasy drafts all year round. So, of course, we're going to hop in those, and you can join us over there as well. But make sure you subscribe, turn on the notifications as well, so you know when that content is up. Let's move on to the waiver wire ad of the year now, fellas. The nominees here: Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who has been phenomenal over the second half of the season. Baker Mayfield was being drafted as a quarterback 21 this year, yet as a quarterback 5 on the season. Jonnu Smith, the tight end 4 this year, and has been on an absolute tear since about week 6 or 7 or so, I believe. And then Juwan Jennings, who gave you that massive 45-point performance in week 3, ended up being a valuable piece on your roster throughout the rest of the season as well. Ty, I'll start with you this time. Who would you give the waiver wire ad of the year to?
I think most people would say Bucky Irving, but I'm personally going to say Baker Mayfield, just because I think he had success for more time this year. Like, if you picked up Baker Mayfield, your quarterback position was on lock. Like, you didn't need to take Baker Mayfield out of your lineup. It took Bucky Irving a little while to get going. Yes, it's been great when he got going, but I just think from a longevity perspective, Baker Mayfield was doing it better than the other 3 guys.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you could pick up a top 5 quarterback on the year, I mean, he was going like 150 overall, but most teams weren't drafting 2 quarterbacks. And in any 10-man league, like Baker Mayfield wouldn't have even been a second quarterback on a team if you went by ADP. Cameron, who would you give the award to?
I gotta give it to Jonnu Smith. I wanted to give it to Bucky as well. But since Tua returned, he was the wide receiver 2 overall, wide receiver 4 in points per game, averaging 15.3 from week 11 on. Tight end, sorry.
I mean, he's basically a wide receiver,
yes,
but yes.
From week 11 on, he was averaging 17 fantasy points per game, which was tight end 1 overall. Or no, sorry, not 17.1. Brock Bowers was averaging 17.1 during that stretch. Jonnu Smith was averaging 18.6 fantasy points per game from week 11 to week 17, including multiple games over 20 fantasy points. And I just think coming from the tight end position, especially with, how gross it was for people who were drafting, Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, to be able to go out and find a guy on the waiver wire who's now doing exactly what you thought you drafted early. That to me, I think is worth that number 1 spot.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I was surprised when I was going through this. I'm like, man, it feels like there weren't any good wide receiver waiver ads this year. But when it came to like running backs, like Tyrone Tracy was another name I considered for this list. Like I know he cooled off at the end of the season, but like there was a 5-week stretch there where you could plug and play Tyrone Tracy, and you didn't have to ask any questions about it. So it's tough because when you look over the second half of the season, Bucky Irving was a top 7 running back, and those just don't grow on trees, right? Like to get that on your waiver wire is invaluable, and that is a set it and forget it flex play every week. The tight end position though was so bad this year that like I have a hard time not giving it to Jonnu Smith personally, because he, again, if you had a Dalton Kincaid by the end of the season, people are like, oh, do I start Jonnu Smith or Kyle Pitts? Wouldn't have been an obvious name in that range, but yeah, like a Dalton Kincaid, people would ask, and I'm like you're playing Jonnu, like you have no reason to not play Jonnu at this point. So there's some ways in which Jonnu actually came and saved that position for your team, and you could have done some other fancy things to build around it too. But I digress. I'm going to cut the drum roll because it just feels cheesy. So we're just gonna cut right to it. The people though voted the waiver wire ad of the year to be Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I can't fault the people for voting Bucky. I mean, Bucky seemingly came out of nowhere. Bucky was kind of being left for dead in fantasy drafts. He was being taken after pick 170 in drafts. Like, I get it. People were in on Rachaad White. They said not much has changed. Bucky Irving, yours truly, said Bucky Irving wasn't going to be that big of a threat. Now here he is, comes out and over the back half of the season, a top 7 running back. That is just so invaluable for your team. So I have no problem with giving it to Bucky, but I'm with you, Cameron. I think there's a stronger case to be made for Jonnu there. Give me a short reaction to the people picking Bucky Irving despite having a Baker Mayfield and a Jonnu Smith to choose from here.
I think it's about right. We love running backs and we love wide receivers, and I think they tend to, especially in these awards, are gonna win out unless you have like a Brock Bowers-esque season. And Bucky's so much fun to watch on the field. Also, I think that just adds to it. So I'm not shocked by any means that Bucky won that one.
You shocked at all, Ty?
Nah, I'm not. I again, he was the easier highlight reel to watch of the 4, right? And especially again, we were ranking him as a top 10 running back over the latter half of the season, right? So I totally get it.
Let's move on to our first negative award. I guess it's really our only negative award. It is the biggest bust of the year, and your candidates are Tyreek Hill, who was taken with a top 5 pick this year. Some took him as high as even number 2 overall, finished as the wide receiver 18 on the season. You have Travis Etienne, who was taken with an early 2nd round pick. Correct me if I'm wrong. He didn't even finish as a top 30 running back this year. No. Marvin Harrison Jr., taken at the 1-2 turn, also failed to finish as a top 25 running back this year. And then Anthony Richardson, the hype was so high on him. He was being taken in the 4th round, the quarterback 4-5 overall. Failed to return on that value. He was benched mid-season for Joe Flacco, and even now that he's back in the latter half of the season, he has not returned on value. Now, here's the massive caveat, fellas. Who did we forget on this list? Do we need to just or do an extended list quick of these other busts that could have made the list? We only gave the people 4. I hear you over on Facebook. I don't remember who messaged us, said we got it all wrong and didn't include Christian McCaffrey. He was in strong consideration for this list, but because he missed pretty much all of his games this year because of injury, I chose to not put him on the list. But I also feel like that's a runaway CMC. So this is the biggest bust that's not named Christian McCaffrey award. So who else did we miss on this list?
CJ Stroud could definitely be on this list, going right behind Anthony Richardson. Some people might think he's worse than Richardson was for their team because you tried to play him all season long and it just never happened. Whereas Richardson at least was benched. So you're like, okay, I'm done with it here. I'm not moving forward. I'm trying to think of the running back position. Breece Hall probably could have been on this list.
Yeah, finished top 15, but still disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, you drafted him as a running back too, right? So for the fact that he's finishing behind guys you're taking in the 7th, 8th round, or 6th, 7th round, like Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, Chuba Hubbard. Yeah, I felt that as a Breece Hall manager. Very, very disappointed. And then tight ends was Sam Laporta, taken as a 2nd round pick. Dalton Kincaid, who actually I'm pretty sure finished lower than Kyle Pitts. Yes,
I think he did actually.
He finished as the tight end 26, averaging 7.8 points per game, whereas Kyle Pitts was the tight end 14, averaging a full 8 points per game. So,
oh my goodness!
But yeah, just disgusting from that tight end position for sure.
Does that change the people's mind that Jonnu Smith should win the waiver ad of the year? Ty, anybody else that you would nominate for this list?
Yeah, Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, great one. Yeah,
that one. I'm also old enough to remember that some people thought that Deebo Samuel would have a breakout against the Rams.
Hey, I was just a week early, man.
You were just a week early. Right, you're right.
Yeah.
Michael. Okay, that's a victory lap one. That's not. You could say I know Chris Olave dealt with injuries.
Yeah.
He kind of felt like one. Jalen Waddle though probably is the
that's
other.
That's another one. Yeah. That one stings a bit too. That was a flag plant this year. And
Tank Dell,
another one. Yeah, I mean, this is all ADP cost benefit analysis at this point that you're playing. Out of the 4 nominees that we had though, of Tyreek Hill, and the rest of the bunch here, golly, I had it right in front of me and I lost it. Tyreek Hill, Travis Etienne, Anthony Richardson, and Marv. Who are you giving the award to?
I'll just run through the 4 real quick because I think they all have a different argument. Anthony Richardson, I think the quarterback position was strong enough that you had a pivot option. So that's why I'm not going to give it to Richardson there. And then I think he played well enough in most of the games he was in, right? He still averaged 16 fantasy points a game. So if you played him overall in the games he played, right, some kills you, some you were fine. Tyreek Hill averaged over 16.5 points per game down the stretch. I understand you took him as your 2nd overall pick, but if you take, once Tua came back, he played much better from week 9 on, I think is what it was. For me, it's between Marvin Harrison Jr. and Travis Etienne. And the reason I'm considering Marv here is just because as a rookie that you took that high, you're just believing it's going to get better. We talked about rookies getting better down the stretch, so you never took him out of your starting lineup. And he had 3 finishes inside the top 20, but I got to give it to Etienne because, like you said, early 2nd round pick, and you knew by week 5, he really wasn't even rosterable anymore.
Yeah.
And Tank Bigsby came up or took over the backfield. He averaged less than 9 fantasy points a game. There was never a week where you felt like, yep, all right, I can plug in Travis Etienne here from probably week 6 on. And it was just gross.
Yeah, Travis Etienne, the wide receiver 38 on the year, averaging 8.7 fantasy points per game in 14 contests. Yeah, that has to be the biggest bust to me. I mean, you were taking him middle of the 2nd round.
Yeah.
You burned your 2nd round pick on fire. Like at the end of the year, you're questioning if you should just drop Travis Etienne for a handcuff at that point because he ain't hitting your lineup. You know that for sure. Who would you give it to, Ty?
I personally would give it to Etienne, but I would not be surprised if most people would say Marv just because of the hype that he had coming into the season, greatest wide receiver prospect, all that stuff. Like there's the narrative hype that Marv got, but Etienne from a complete fall on your face perspective, like there's no one bigger than ETN.
And the thing with Marv too, like Cameron, you talked about this in your point with Marvin Harrison Jr. here, is like we saw rookie wide receivers get better in the second. We saw it from Brian Thomas. We saw it from Ladd McConkey. We saw it from Xavier Worthy. Malik Neighbors had a bounce back. He started the year off hot, got cold in the middle of the year, but like he's been fine down the stretch again in terms of PPR format. So we saw it with almost every other rookie wide receiver that was relevant this year, except for Marvin Harrison Jr. And now he can barely give you a top 30 finish on the year. The people, though, let's see who they voted for, fellas, as the biggest bust of the year. Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. He actually ran away with this vote. 50% of the vote went to Tyreek Hill, followed by Travis Etienne at 30%. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Anthony Richardson each then had 10% of the vote. I'm not surprised by this one because you spent a top 5 pick on Tyreek Hill, and he was supposed to be good this year. I do think you can blame some of his struggles on Tyler Huntley. If you knew Tyreek Hill was going to have Tyler Huntley this year, you wouldn't have taken him that high. It's part of the game, though, right? So I think people are going to have stronger emotions tied to Tyreek Hill and him barely finishing as a top 20 wide receiver this year. But man, drafting ETN as a top 10 running back and having him barely finish as a top 40 running back, I don't know if I quite agree with the people on this one.
Yeah, I really think it comes down to just ADP. He had ADP of like 3, I think, of this season, and him and CD were supposed to be the safe picks, right? They were supposed to be. Nothing can happen. Nothing can go wrong with these guys. They're, for sure going to be great. They have got good enough situations. And then he ends up as a wide receiver 18. So I think that's where like a lot of the pain of the people comes from on Tyreek Hill.
Yeah. Anything you want to add on top of that, Ty? Because I think that's what it is. I think it is like it was CMC, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill. Pick one of the 3 by the time, we learned about CMC's injury. So the fact that you spent a top 3 pick on Tyreek Hill and you're not even getting a top 20 wide receiver. I mean, it's the cost benefit analysis here. And how much weight do you put on Tyreek Hill's ADP versus Travis Etienne's, even though they were only like 14 picks apart?
Yeah, I understand it. But even when Tua came back, Tyreek has been the wide receiver 20 in points per game. So Tyreek hasn't necessarily like sunk your team. I know again, for a top 3 wide receiver, for a top 3 pick, top 2 wide receiver 20 is not good. But ETN's not playable. You can still at least play Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, that's what it came down to for me was, can you still play Tyreek Hill? Yes. You cannot play Travis Etienne. Like that is a early second round pick burned on fire. Let's do one more category before we take a quick break, fellas. Let's go on. Let's bring the vibes back up a little bit. All right. Let's talk about the biggest steal in fantasy football drafts this year. Now, I made sure to put people on this list that were actually drafted in fantasy football leagues this year. Because you could be like, oh, the biggest steal was Tyrone Tracy. I like just throwing out a random name who was taken, in the 220s, and he finished as a running back 20. But you were picking him up off the waiver wire. That's not like a draft day value. The biggest deal to me is the biggest draft day value. So the candidates were Chuba Hubbard, Brock Bowers, Brian Thomas Jr., and Chase Brown. This is a fascinating one to me because you can go a lot of different ways here in terms of the breakout that we saw from Chuba Hubbard. Brock Bowers, we've already talked about his excellence this year. And same with Brian Thomas Jr. They're getting nominated for categories left and right here. And then Chase Brown was being taken only 5 running backs behind Zach Moss. So he was being drafted in a majority of leagues this year and now has turned into a top 10 running back of the season. So, Cameron, who would you give this award to?
Yeah, it really is interesting. I pulled up ADP quick. So Bowers went at the 83rd overall pick, so into the 7th round. Brian Thomas Jr. was 105. This is on sleeper half PPR is what I'm looking at right now. Chase Brown 117, and then Chuba Hubbard 130. So we actually have a pretty decent spread between all of these guys. For me, if we're talking biggest steal, it comes down. It's really for me between Chase Brown and Brian Thomas Jr. Both top 5. Had top 5 stretches at their position to end the season. Both drafted a little bit later than Brock Bowers was. I think when you start getting up in that 7th round, I don't consider you as much of a steal. But where I do understand that he is a steal compared to ADP because he was a tight end 1 overall. I think I'm going to let my bias win here, and I'm going to give it to Brian Thomas Jr. I think Chase Brown has a great, since he took over averaging 20.6 fantasy points per game in that backfield, phenomenal. You did have to wait till week 9 to really start to see it. That was the only thing that was kind of a bummer. Whereas Brian Thomas Jr., you kind of had good success all season long, except for really the games where Mac Jones came into the middle of the season. So,
yeah,
I'm going to give it to Brian Thomas Jr. this one.
I'm gonna leapfrog you, Ty, just because it came down to Brian Thomas Jr. and Chase Brown for me. Nothing against Chuba Hubbard. Like Chuba Hubbard to finish as a top 12 running back on the season, without actually playing, week 17, mind you, right? Like he was placed on IR to end the season. The fact that he's a top 12 running back and you got him at pick 131, I mean, that is a massive, massive value. But it came down to Brian Thomas Jr. and Chase Brown for me. And when Chase Brown took over as a starter for Zach Moss, from week 4 on, Chase Brown was actually averaging a half a point more per game than Brian Thomas Jr. That was the tiebreaker for me, was just that Chase Brown was actually outperforming Brian Thomas Jr. But again, this is one where like the people could pick either option, and I don't blame them whatsoever. Where are you at, Ty? Who would you give the award to?
I personally would give it to Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah.
Because I also look at this from a longevity perspective, and the fact that Chuba went the latest of the 4 and it was a set and forget it piece by week 3 of the season. Right. Yeah. And I know that Chase Brown was more productive second half of the year compared to Chuba Hubbard. Chuba was a bit more inconsistent second half of the year, all that stuff. But again, I think for the guy that with the latest of the 4 that was producing, succeeding, whatever you want to call it, for the entirety of the year, I personally lean Chuba on this one.
Let's see what the people said, though. They gave the biggest steal of the year award to Brock Bowers. Again, Brock Bowers, a double winner today. Brock Bowers, 42% of the vote. Chuba Hubbard in second place with 21% of the vote. So Brock Bowers doubled him up. Chase Brown was in third with 20% of the vote. And Brian Thomas Jr. just can't get any love. He only got 17% of the vote. Pretty sure in all 3 of the categories he's been nominated for, he's finished last place, which just like feels blasphemous. Like, look, I'm not saying the people are totally incorrect. I'm just saying maybe the people need to turn on some film and watch how good Brian Thomas Jr. has actually been. Because he has been absolutely phenomenal.
Don't you dare say it.
Half of the season.
Don't you dare. Legacy media hates Brian Thomas Jr. That's what it is. They hate Jacksonville, right? They just bury you when you go to Jacksonville.
No, I'm just gonna say the audience knows ball. That's what also.
No.
See you later.
You tie with the
game misconduct.
Future wide receiver 1 overall right there. You better watch your mouth.
I'm shocked that Brock Bowers got 42% of the vote, though.
Yeah,
I get it though. I mean,
right. I get it, but like, that's a hefty percent of the vote, man. That's just shocking to me. The highest drafted out of the bunch. I get it. The tight end 1 overall. Man, again, drafting a top 6 running back though by week 4 in the back, like. We're having Raheem Mostert level conversations with Chase Brown. I get Raheem Mostert wasn't scoring, Chase Brown isn't scoring 20 touchdowns like Raheem Mostert was, but like that's the range we were looking at a Raheem Mostert last year, and everybody was saying, yeah, it's Raheem Mostert clearing away. I'm just shocked Chuba Hubbard or Chase Brown didn't put up more of a fight against Brock Bowers at the polls. That's where I'm at.
I think too, it has to do with a lot with the tight end landscape on the season.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
If the tight ends perform as they were, and he's maybe still tight end 1, but everybody else did well. I think it's different. It's just the fact that he was, it was him, Kittle, and McBride is really the top. I guess Jonnu is the top 4 tight ends. Season.
You picked up Jonnu off the waiver wire, right? So
exactly.
Yeah. No, I get it. I get where the people are coming from. I also just feel like we need to do some justice for Brian Thomas Jr. as well. Let's take a quick break, fellas. We got 5 more awards to give out when we come back. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100. Alrighty, we are back. We have crowned 5 different awards now. The Fantasy Playoffs MVP, the Rookie of the Year, the Waiver Add of the Year, and the biggest bust and biggest steal. Let's move on to the biggest surprise now, fellas. And this, isn't just players you drafted. This is when you look at the finishes in fantasy football this year, you scroll through the list and you think, holy crap, he finished where? That's how I'm kind of looking at this award. So the biggest surprise this year, we have Jonnu Smith up again, finishing as the tight end 4. That is definitely one where I look at it and I just laugh to myself because that's just absurd. Jerry Jeudy climbing up to the wide receiver 11 after his incredible run with Jameis Winston in the middle of the season. You have Baker Mayfield once again, who finished as a quarterback 5. And Sam Darnold of the Minnesota Vikings. How about this? Was the quarterback 7 before Monday Night Football until Jared Goff put up a big game. Is now the quarterback 8 on the season, only 5 points behind Jared Goff. Cameron, who would you give the award to here?
Honestly, I gotta give Jonnu Smith again. I think he deserves the second award just because it was right. Jonnu 3 years ago was the next big tight end, right? He went to New England. We're like, oh, he's gonna be fun. And then it's just he fell off the face of the map. And then to finish as hot as he did, I understand. Everybody here is obviously got a great,
great case.
Case. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you very much. Jerry Jeudy, he was a guy I never truly stopped believing in. I was ready to go down the ship with.
And I was Sam the biggest Darnold, Jerry Jeudy truther. I hopped off before you did.
Sam Darnold, I am going to pat myself on the back a little bit. I did say that
deservedly.
He might be the this year's Geno Smith. Baker, I did not think had this in him. It was, what he did this year was phenomenal. But I am going to give it to Jonnu Smith just because he was left for dead. Oh, we saw what happened to Mike Gesicki. We don't want a Miami tight end. And then he comes out and does that. So, yeah, I'm going to give it to Jonnu.
How about you, Ty? Who are you giving the award to?
Hometown bias is going to get in the way on this one.
Yeah.
I have to give it to Sam Darnold. Not just from an NFL perspective, but Sam Darnold was virtually the last starting quarterback available in fantasy drafts. And he was probably, correct me if I'm wrong, he was probably a finalist for Waiver Add of the Year. Because
he was in contention, yes. It was between him and Baker, and I almost put Darnold in over Juwan Jennings.
Right. Because, again, it's not just the fact that he's top 5 in yards and passing touchdowns, but he's supporting a Justin Jefferson top 5 season. He's supporting a Jordan Addison breakout year, right? He's not. This is not just a quarterback racking up yards and all and other stats and garbage time and stuff. Sam Darnold is everything that you want in a pocket passing quarterback, and obviously, we've talked about the advantage of rushing QBs and stuff like that. But Baker Mayfield and the Sam Darnold are the two, are the guys that if you're hey, I can't get one of these rushing guys, but I'm going to get a guy that's just going to be on an offense that puts up a ton of points, you're going to go with one of them. And again, Sam Darnold for all the narratives and stuff. My bias is winning here.
I do believe the correct answer here is between Jonnu Smith and Sam Darnold. I don't care who you give it to. It's one of those two, though. I'm going to lean Sam Darnold and purely for a funny reason of, I don't know if you guys saw it floating around on Twitter. There was a graphic put out there of everyone's debating the MVP between Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, right? And someone went ahead and put Sam Darnold's stats alongside the 3. He actually has more passing yards than Josh Allen this year. I believe he has a higher completion percentage than Josh Allen as well. I mean, Sam Darnold, I'm not saying he's an MVP candidate, but it's man, you know what? When you look at where Sam Darnold is falling statistically, he's up there with the big dogs, man. I mean, that is shocking to me this year that Sam Darnold is keeping pace with a guy like Josh Allen in the passing game this year. You had that like shocked look on your face, Ty, of like, are you so what? You can't be in on Brian Thomas Jr., but you're going to make the case for Sam Darnold as MVP this year? Is that what you're about to do?
Absolutely, yeah. Heck yeah, I am.
Oh no! Come on.
I know you're talking about it from an NFL narrative perspective, and we do fantasy football. But we talk NFL too. What is Sam? It feels like people. I maybe the best way to say it is this. One of my favorite shows to watch is at the facility. That's with LaShawn McCoy and Emmanuel Acho, Chase Daniels, and James Jones over on Fox. And they've talked about the Vikings being like pretenders or contenders. LaShawn McCoy is like the biggest Sam Darnold hater because he's like, I know what he's been doing, but then he'll go off and say, like, I know what Josh Allen is doing right now. I know what Lamar Jackson doing is right now. And it's just like, is Sam Darnold not doing just as good of ball, playing as good as they are? Obviously, they can rush, but Sam Darnold right now, for whatever reason, isn't in the MVP conversation, probably because of the narrative that he carried into the season that's lingering with him.
I don't think he's Sam Darnold's been great. Don't get me wrong. I don't necessarily think he's MVP though. You could put another quarterback in with this Minnesota Vikings team. You could put in like if JJ McCarthy were healthy. Do you think JJ McCarthy? I'm not saying JJ McCarthy's going to be a 4,200 yard passer this year. But like we've seen this before in the Minnesota Vikings offense where you can slide in another quarterback. Yeah. And if Kevin O'Connell can do it with a Sam Darnold, he could probably do it with, Brock Purdy isn't the right name, but like a Baker Mayfield, if he were to come in, he probably could do this in Minnesota as well, right? Like, I do think Darnold's a bit more of a product of Kevin O'Connell's system. And that's not to say Sam Darnold isn't balling. He's playing great football right now. But, when you look at Superman, the MVP award is like, are you Superman for your team? That is Lamar Jackson. That is Josh Allen. That is Saquon Barkley. That is Jalen Hurts isn't in the MVP conversation, but like those are the kind of guys we look at. I just don't think Sam Darnold is that level of MVP alpha. We're getting really sidetracked, but go ahead, Ty. You're gawking at me as if
I need to say this. People were all aboard Brock Purdy being an MVP finalist last year.
Oh yeah, that was the dumbest thing in the world. I still stand by my opinion on that. Like if Brock Purdy was an MVP candidate last year, Sam Darnold isn't this year.
Well, so if that's your stance, that's fine. But I will then just call out the hypocrisy that I see in other media people then saying, well, Brock Purdy was an MVP finalist, and for the exact same reasonings that Sam Darnold and you could take Brock Purdy out of that San Francisco offense and put in any other quarterback and it'd be great. Well, then either Sam Darnold is an MVP candidate or he's not because of logic that you use. Lucas, yours makes sense. Yours is coherent.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot of hypocrisy. I think there's a lot of bias that Sam Darnold is not in the MVP conversation more. I'm not saying he should win it. That's definitely a Lamar Jackson award.
Sure. we're not. No, we're not doing this. We need to. No.
Over Saquon.
The people. But we're talking about the biggest surprise. Here we are talking about MVP. The biggest surprise that people gave the award to Sam Darnold of the Minnesota Vikings.
That's right.
I think this is incredibly worthy. Coming into the season, nobody was expecting Sam Darnold to be a top 10 quarterback. Cameron, again, this is where you get your flowers here. You brought this up in our group chat at the start of the season of what if Sam Darnold is that left for dead quarterback this year? It was Daniel Jones 3 years ago. It was Geno Smith 2 years ago. It was Baker Mayfield last year. And now here we are. Sam Darnold, top 10 quarterback, the left for dead, totally forgotten about, wrote him off. Sam Darnold didn't write back, not to apply Geno Smith to Sam Darnold here, but very, very worthy of this award. Let's move on to the breakout of the year, though. We got to keep it moving. We spent a lot of time on the biggest surprise in Sam Darnold. The biggest surprise, our nominees here are or the breakout of the year, are Jackson Smith and Jigba, Terry McLaurin, both of which are top 8 wide receivers this year. Chase Brown, obviously, coming out in the second half of the season, really, again, since week 4. And then Chuba Hubbard as well. Like, Chuba Hubbard got 238 totes last year, got 250 this year, but what he did with those totes was far more significant than what he did last year. So I definitely think he qualifies as a breakout here. Cameron, who would you give the award to?
I'm going to give it to Chase Brown. I think the case, is it you that laid out, Lucas, for the biggest steal? I think it just reigns true right now. 20.6 fantasy points a game over his last, since week 9 when he truly took over the backfield from Zach Moss. coming from, it was like, is this guy a special teamer? Is he an actual running back to what he is now? I think JSN would probably be my number 2. But I think what Chase Brown just did over the back half of the season was just so incredible that I'd give it to him.
What about you, Ty?
It's between JSN and Chase Brown for me.
Yeah.
Because I've always personally had like a soft spot for Chuba, that I think he could be a good NFL running back. He showed that this year. Terry, again, that may just be because he's 28 years old. He's definitely the oldest guy on this list.
Right. Took him
But-
how long to break out?
Yeah, that's a fair point, right? Like it took him a while to kind of crack this top 10, top 12 echelon that we've been hoping for.
Yeah.
I'll say Chase Brown as well. JSN's like right there. I think it's a coin flip between those two guys.
Yeah, once again, I feel like out of a category of like, I will say these are 4 strong candidates for this award. I do think JSN and Chase Brown are the 2 that do deserve the award the most. I would also give it to Chase Brown again. And this is like defying my expectations. Like JSN, I knew the breakout was going to, you figured it was going to come and had to come this year if it was going to come at all in this Ryan Grubb system. We talked about that a little bit before the season. But Chase Brown, like, yeah, we were concerned. I'll speak on behalf of me and other Chase Brown doubters that, yeah, is Chase Brown really just an explosive play guy where you give him 5 touches a game and you just hope one of them is dynamite? Is he mostly a special teamer? How much does Zach Moss actually take? What's the, like, there's just so many question marks there where Chase Brown came in and defied all of my expectations. And to get that level of running back at pick 130 and to see the production that he was putting up, I mean, it was running back 1 number. So yeah, I would give the award to Chase Brown, but again, JSN is by no means a bad candidate for this award or an undeserving winner of this award. The people, though, voted the breakout of the year to be Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. 43% of the vote went to JSN. Chase Brown did come in second with 29% of the vote, followed by Terry McLaurin and then Chuba Hubbard with only 12% of the vote. So the people did go with JSN here. I mean, I get it. Top 7 wide receiver on the year. Outshined DK Metcalf, like stronger competition than Chase Brown had and Zach Moss. So did he get a little bit of favor, a little bit of luck with DK missing some time, definitely coming back, not 100%. You can make the case, but again, I don't think JSN is an undeserving winner of this award. I just think we all agree we would lean towards Chase Brown just based around how many question marks he had coming into the season.
Yeah, JSN, right? It was so disappointing last season because you were like, there's just nothing happened. Look, at the end of the season, he was, like I said, he was above DK Metcalf. So he was the wide receiver 1 from a production standpoint in this offense. So totally deserves it. I just don't think you can overlook Chase Brown and what he's done at the same time. So people, I think you got this one wrong. I'm going to be honest.
No. You have such harsh words, Ty, or no?
I do not. I tend to side with the audience, but I also agree with Cam on this one. Again, I said it was a coin flip between these two, in all fairness. I completely understand JSN, but I think we were all expecting JSN to eventually, I wouldn't call breakout, come through, right?
Yeah.
Because we knew the talent was there. We knew the offensive system was there. It was just going to be a matter of time. For Chase Brown, though, it was like special teamer of the year candidate. Like no one thought this could be Chase Brown's reality.
Yeah. In like top 24 running back for Chase Brown, I think was like in the cards for most people. But yeah, to be a top 7 running back this year and outshine first round picks is like that was not in the cards for the majority of people. So Chase Brown and Brian Thomas Jr., the 2 I wish got a little bit more love on this episode, but I can understand the people leaning the way in which they did. Let's talk about the comeback player of the year now, the player that has vastly disappointed you in fantasy football in years past, maybe has even just been flat out irrelevant, but now has made a name for themselves once again, has come back with strong force in 2024. Our candidates here are Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals, JK Dobbins, the Los Angeles Chargers, Jerry Jeudy once again climbing into the top 12 wide receiver realm this year. And then we see Sam Darnold find his way to this list again to be a top 10 quarterback. Ty, I'll start with you for this one. Who would you give the comeback player of the year to? In fantasy football.
Fantasy football, yeah. JK Dobbins is a feel-good story. Everyone's rooted for JK Dobbins, and it's good to see him succeed, but I think it's got to be Joe Burrow. Just because you missed second half of the year for all the doubt that he had going into the year because he was never going to be able to throw a football the same ever again. I still remember week 1, he can't grab the water bottle, guys. He can't grab a water bottle. He silenced everybody, and now he's arguably been, if his team was winning more games, he's the MVP of the year.
Yeah, totally.
Like that, I have to give it to Burrow.
Cameron, what about you?
I gotta go Dobbins. I thought this dude was on the way out. I thought there was no way he's ever even playing again. I mean, you go ACL to Achilles back to back, and he was a top 15 running back before he got hurt in week 12. So I'm going to stick with Dobbins. He was, I think, running back 16 points per game on the season, because he wasn't right. It wasn't like one of those where like, oh, he overcame all these injuries and stuff and then just played. No, he was extremely relevant. If he doesn't get hurt, he's probably in that conversation for steal of the year.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, he's probably, him and Chuba are neck and neck for probably steal of the year if he doesn't get hurt. So I'm gonna have JK Dobbins be my comeback player of the year.
I'm actually shocked we all went 3 different directions here. I don't know how you look at this and not give it to Sam Darnold. I just don't. We're talking about a dude who wasn't even relevant. I mean, this is the Geno Smith case, right? Drafted into the league, starts a handful of games, just gets kicked to the curb, gets a second chance, but now Sam Darnold's on his 3rd, 4th chance in Minnesota, and he comes out and he finishes as a top 10. I mean, this is Geno Smith all over again. So I'm going to keep my what did the people say here? I'm going to keep my I can't even think of the phrase now. I'm going to quit babbling. I'm going to keep my take the same. I'm going to stay consistent. Golly, there was a phrase I was looking for, and I just sound like an idiot now. I'm going to keep my stance the same. And if I was so much of a lover of Geno Smith being the comeback player of the year, I'm going to keep that same energy. There it is. Keep that same energy for Sam Darnold this year to finish as a top 10 quarterback. Has to be the comeback player of the year for me. That being said, though, the people voted, and their vote is the one that matters here. They voted the comeback player of the year to be Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I will say, as much as I was in strong favor of Sam Darnold, I also think it's pretty tough not to give Joe Burrow the credit he deserves here for, like you said, Ty, being out the second half of last season with that wrist injury. I was talking about it all offseason. Like, you hear AJ Hawk talking about it on the Pat McAfee show, right? Like, it's just not the same. It's not the same as a normal wrist injury. This isn't a wrist injury that quarterbacks have. There's so much questions around that coming into the season. Now Joe Burrow comes in, and like we've said, if his team was winning more, Joe Burrow was right in the MVP conversation with Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. And I know people are kind of shooing him in as kind of like the 4th option with Saquon Barkley as well. But man, yeah, if his team was winning more, Joe Burrow, would definitely be an MVP candidate. And that's a heck of a comeback he's making this year. With the success that he's had with both elevating Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins, to top 3 wide receivers in fantasy points per game this year.
Yeah, it's disappointing to me. I will say that JK Dobbins isn't getting more love, but it is hard to argue with what Joe Burrow is doing on the field.
Sorry, and I misspoke on T. Higgins is technically not a top. Oh, no, he is a top 3 wide receiver in fantasy points per game this year. I was correct. I knew I was right. I just stick to my intuition here. Are you muted, Ty? There you
go. No. It's just very heavily skewed.
Skewed? What do you mean skewed?
Did any other receiver put a 51? No, it's not 51 points. 40. What was it? 43.
Oh, you're talking about how heavily weighted it was.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. I mean, you get 40.1 in the final week of the season. I mean, T did give you 2 other weeks of 29 plus. as well.
That's true.
In the fantasy playoffs, also gave you 19.8 in back-to-back weeks before his 40-point explosion. So I get it. It's like the DJ Moore case from last year, right? Where it's like you look at DJ Moore and it's like, yeah, he gave you a handful of games in the teens, but then he gave you 2 40-point bombs, which are gonna weigh his results a little bit. But I digress. Joe Burrow, a fine winner of the award here. 42% of the vote to Sam Darnold's 30. JK Dobbins with 19% of the vote, and Jerry Jeudy bringing up the rear with 9% of the vote. Best performance of the year, our second to last award here, fellas. This one is always a little bit interesting because I think when we look at it, we can just look at the best performance of the year and just say, well, who scored the most fantasy points in a single game this year? Let's give the award to him. But this is one where I'm always curious to see, do people actually take into account the context of the game, which position it actually was who scored all these points? Because I think the points can come in a variety of ways depending on the position. So I'm always curious where people lean on this one, or if people are just going to look at it and say, give me the player with the most points this year, which Ja'Marr Chase scored the most points in a single game this year. He is our first candidate, 55.4 points in week 10. Josh Allen in his literal Superman game against the Los Angeles Rams in week 14, he put up 51.9 fantasy points. Jawan Jennings in week 3 put up 46.5. Saquon Barkley, 46.2 in week 12 against the Baltimore Ravens. Again, context, I think you can boil in a lot of different ways here. Cameron, are you just giving it to the guy who scored the most points this year?
No, I'm giving it to Josh Allen. And it is it's just the fact that it's week 14. And if you had Josh Allen on your team, you were in the fantasy playoffs most likely. Because of just that one single performance. Also, the quarterback position putting up 50 fantasy points in a 4-point passing touchdown league is unheard of. The fact he had 3 rushing touchdowns, 3 passing touchdowns, I think he had 400 total yards, just unbelievable from him in that aspect. Obviously, Ja'Marr Chase, phenomenal week. I'm just giving it to Josh Allen because of the week that he did it in, and he was close enough to Chase, and then he added into that positional, I think, advantage of the quarterback position scoring that much points.
I need to make a quick adjustment on my Saquon Barkley. Week 12 was against the Los Angeles Rams. That was a week early. The Ravens were week 13. The Rams were week 12. Want to make sure I get that straight. Because I said it, I'm like, I actually think I'm a week early on that, and I was. So Saquon Barkley was against the Los Angeles Rams in week 12. I am with you, though, Cameron. I think this is a Josh Allen award here. Week 14, I am taking a little bit of the NFL context into account of just like, you watch that game, and it's just like, literally the Bills offense was Josh Allen. They only ran the ball, 6 times in that game with their running backs. It was just stupid. It was Josh Allen, all Josh Allen. He sealed you your berth into the fantasy playoffs if you didn't have it already. That to me is the performance of the year, as great as Ja'Marr Chase's was in week 10. What about you though, Ty? Who are you giving it to?
I think it'll be Josh Allen, but personally, I think it's Saquon. 46 points. I think the reason why he won't win it is just because Saquon Barkley also put up 31 points in the game, 29.9, 31.8, 27 in week 16. Like, we got so used to Saquon Barkley just putting up 25 points or more in a week that 46 was like, yeah, that's Saquon Barkley. That's within his range of outcomes. And it's like, hey, let's take a second. 255 yards on the ground. I don't care who you are. That's impressive, right? Like, again, all three of us remember the 300-yard game that Adrian Peterson had against the Chargers, right? Yeah. That's like, yeah. So again, it'll be Josh Allen. I personally think it's Saquon because, to me, 250 yards, 46 points from the running back position maybe the better way to say it is this. Alvin Kamara put up 44 points in week 2. Yeah, that's because he had crazy receiving work. Okay, like let's put some respect on some rushing production here.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think all these are worthy candidates of being here. You can apply the context however you want in each scenario, but the people voted the best performance of the year to be Ja'Marr Chase in week 10 against the Baltimore Ravens, scoring 55 fantasy points. Again, I understand why. When you put up 3 touchdowns, get 17 targets, catch 11 of them for 264 yards against any NFL defense, that is incredible. right? That is taking nothing away from Ja'Marr Chase. It was between Ja'Marr Chase and Josh Allen for me here. But again, just understanding the context of the quarterback position, putting up 51 fantasy points, nearly 52 fantasy points, and Josh Allen basically playing Superman that entire game, and one of the most fun games to watch this year. To seal you a berth into the fantasy playoffs, I think it doesn't get much better than that. But again, splitting hairs between those two, all four of these performances were phenomenal. Ja'Marr Chase took home 66% of the vote. Josh Allen with 21%, followed by Saquon with 9%, and Juwan Jennings with 5% of the vote. Fellas, we've reached the end of the episode, so we now need to talk about the overall MVP of fantasy football for 2024. Man, it's crazy how much this landscape has changed over the last few weeks. Because in some cases, some people might have said this was, you could throw, even though Joe Mixon missed a couple games earlier in the season, people 4 weeks ago would have told you Joe Mixon would need to be in the fantasy MVP conversation. People would have told you Derrick Henry needs to be in the fantasy football MVP conversation. I think it's come down to, frankly, like a 2.5-man race. And I think, and I don't say all four, because I think with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson being in this conversation, they're really, I'll say a 3-man race then, because I think both of them are like, yeah, you could vote for a quarterback here, but it's really come down to Ja'Marr Chase and Saquon Barkley as the fantasy football MVP this year. So those are our four candidates: Ja'Marr Chase, Saquon Barkley, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson. I think it's a coin flip between Ja'Marr Chase, Saquon Barkley. You can talk about positional value and how much Saquon Barkley has been dominating the running back position, but I mean, Ja'Marr Chase, when you're putting up nearly 24 fantasy points per game this year, 23 fantasy points per game, you look at Saquon Barkley, that's a full point, or nearly a full 1.5 more than Saquon Barkley this year. I have a hard time not giving it to Ja'Marr Chase. I don't know about you two.
I lean Ja'Marr Chase, and the only reason is if I look at fantasy points per game from a PPR format, Saquon Barkley is scoring 2.4 points more per game than the running back 2. Ja'Marr Chase is scoring 4.3 more per game.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to have it come down to. That's what I'm going to give it. Ja'Marr Chase is also going to win the Triple Crown. I understand Saquon's hit 2,000 yards. If he plays in Week 18, could have a chance of setting, the single season record. But I am going to lean Ja'Marr Chase here for the fantasy MVP.
2 votes for Ja'Marr Chase, Ty. You going in a different direction? Make it 3?
No, make it 3. Make it 3. I mean, I feel like this could be a very quarterback dominated award as well. I mean, we literally have 2 quarterbacks in the finalists, but
yeah,
for Ja'Marr Chase, again, he was the single reason why you won your leagues this year. I mean, you probably won your league because of Ja'Marr Chase.
I think you could give it to either of the 2. They both have been phenomenal this year. It's so fascinating to see. I just want to take a moment to reflect on, the downfall we've seen from, I shouldn't say downfall, but like the lack of production we've seen from Derrick Henry over the back half of the season. I mean, even Joe Mixon has been disappointing as well. Like from week 14 on, when it's mattered most, like Derrick Henry's disappeared. I mean, he's the running back 20. I'm trying to find Joe Mixon here. I've only got one hand available and I'm scrolling down, so I can't even see where Joe Mixon is. But like, it's been disappointing from both of these guys, who probably both would have been in this conversation had we done it, mid-season. People would have been like, well, Derrick Henry, he's got a real case for it. Derrick Henry's just not in the conversation. It's now his quarterback that's in the conversation. So 3 votes for Ja'Marr Chase on our end. But who did the people vote for the most prestigious award in fantasy football this year? The people voted the fantasy MVP of 2024 to be Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles, taking home 43% of the vote. Ja'Marr Chase with 32% of the vote, followed up by Josh Allen at 13% and Lamar Jackson at 12%. I'm not going to, I don't think people got it wrong. This is totally a point discrepancy thing for me, where one is outperforming the wide receiver 2 by 4 fantasy points. The other one's only doing it by half as many points. One is averaging more points per game than the other. Like, that's how I'm breaking the tie here. Nothing against Saquon Barkley. He has been absolutely phenomenal this year. But out of all the disappointments, at wide receiver this year. The injuries and everything. Like if you drafted Ja'Marr Chase, it was tried and true the entire year. You could give the award to either, but to me, I'm more of an analytics guy, so I'm going to give it to the guy based on the analytic tiebreakers here. So Saquon Barkley, a worthy recipient, but I'm just shocked that the people leaned that heavily towards Saquon Barkley.
I think we're still very running back biased in fantasy football as a whole. I think people are. I think that's the way it's always been. Is you take running backs first. Running backs are the most important position, and then obviously anytime someone breaks 2,000 rushing yards, that's a pretty big deal. And I think that carries quite a bit of weight, even if from a fantasy perspective, Chase did score more points this season.
Yeah, I mean, a worthy recipient still. 2,000. I mean, it's remarkable what Saquon Barkley has done this year. We're not trying to downplay what Saquon Barkley has done. Just trying to lay out more of a holistic picture rather than fantasy vibes, if you will. Ty, you were going to add something in here too.
I just see this award very similarly to the Offensive Player of the Year award in the NFL, right? Like the non-MVP, the non-quarterback. It's between Saquon Barkley and Ja'Marr Chase for that award. And for fantasy purposes, I mean, it's Ja'Marr Chase in my opinion, but again, totally understand Saquon Barkley getting it.
Again, a worthy recipient. The people have spoken. They had their voices heard. If you want to have your voice heard and get even more of our content for future podcast episodes as well, make sure you follow us on all of our other social media platforms. FFL is on Twitter. The FFL is on Instagram. Fantasy Football Fellas on Facebook and TikTok, which, hey, TikTok might be saved. We'll see. It's a day-by-day battle. We're grinding there. So if you want to support us on other platforms as well, make sure you do that. And join our Discord as well. I want to try and get some more Discord involvement into podcast episodes here. I'm like, can I throw out an idea that I've been toying with on the episode? And like, I haven't run this past either of you two yet. What if we made one of our episodes next year like a hot takes episode, like a weekly episode where we just allow people to fill our Discord chat with whatever hot takes, reactions, opinions that they have, and we react to them after every week on the podcast. We did like a panic meter. We did a little bit of what was the other one that we did?
Trending or ending.
Right. Like, I wonder if like we get the people involved with those episodes and we actually get their opinions and we hear them and react to them after every week. I don't know. Just an idea I have. So join our Discord as well. That's down in the description of the audio podcast or YouTube video you're listening to. So we'll see. I want to try and get some more community involvement into these episodes and not just, three dudes with baseball caps on just babbling at you for an entire episode about who they think should win some meaningless, made up fantasy football awards. Thanks for tuning in, though. If you're not subscribed already, make sure you do that. Turn on the notification bell as well. We're posting all throughout all throughout the off season. Dynasty and NFL draft content will be coming your way, so stick around. Hang out for a while. We're going to be chatting football all off season long. The NFL doesn't take a break, and neither do we. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you all. Thanks for supporting us. Helps us do what we do every single day throughout the week. We'll see you all soon. Deuces.
Deuces.